Hello, anatomy and physiology. We are here today to talk about blood. So you should be watching this video when you finish up your test over the integumentary system. We talked a lot about injuries in the past unit, and so blood kind of ends up being kind of a nice transition for us. I was intending for us to do the skeletal system, but with rumors that perhaps we may not be face to face next week, I thought this might be a better unit for us to do from home rather than trying to learn all the bones without having a physical model for us to use and study. So please find in your notes or your packets that I gave you your Unit 10 blood. It's a pretty small packet, and you got kind of a picture of a guy getting blood drawn out of his arm there on the front. All right. I don't have a test day set for you yet, but I will let you know as soon as I figured that out. We're just going to be on the first page today for our notes and nowhere else for now. So what you see at the very top here is a person getting blood withdrawn from their arm, and then it's put into a test tube and spun around in this device here. That device is called a centrifuge. I want you to label that. And what a centrifuge does is it spins material super fast, and centrifugal force forces the heavier, more dense elements to separate out to the bottom and the lighter ones to be at the top. This is actually what they do in the process when they remove plasma from the body, or if any of you were the power red donors at our blood drive, this is also what the machine did to separate out our red blood cells so that they could take double the red blood cells from an individual. So when they separate them out, there's actually three main groups that they separate into. This top portion that's got this yellowish color is the plasma, which I'm sure you've heard of before. That makes up 55% of the blood. It's going to be mostly water and nutrients, but we'll go through what all is found in your plasma in a minute. Then the bottom, more dense portion is going to be the formed elements. Formed elements means cells. Okay, these are the actual cells of the body. Mostly in this case, we're going to talk about its majority of it is your red blood cells, but there are other cells in there too. And technically, those itty bitty little pieces is the other things that aren't red blood cells are in this little bar right here. Those are called the buffy coat. They make up less than 1% of the overall constitution of your blood, and it is an important piece to your body. However, there's not very many of them. Doesn't mean they're not super duper important for your body. So we've got our three different sections essentially that makes up blood plasma, our formed elements, and a small portion of that is the buffy coat. But the buffy coat does belong to the formed elements. You'll see that here as we label things in a second. All right, let's talk about plasma first. So in this column here, it's like what makes it up, the constituent, okay? What does it consist of? And then the functions of those things. So the function of this thing we're going to label is a solvent, meaning it dissolves lots of things. For other substances, it also absorbs heat because this molecule is wonderful for living things. It is water. So 90% of the plasma is water. The majority, when you are bleeding, the majority of what is being lost from blood is water. You have salts, which are also called electrolytes. So when you are enjoying a beverage that says like, oh, it's Gatorade, has electrolytes, it just means it has salts, things that you might be sweating out during physical activity. Some of those salts include sodium, calcium, bicarbonate. That one's really important for our blood. We'll talk about more why later. Potassium and chlorine. Those are some very important salts. They're charged, so that's what makes them a salt. And they're really important for balancing out our cells and our plasma, so our osmotic balance, meaning osmosis, trying to keep an equal balance on both sides. Remember, hypotonic, hypertonic, isotonic. These salts are important that we have the right balance on the outside of our cells that matches the inside so that we have stable cells that don't burst or shrivel up. It also helps regulate the pH of our blood and regulates how permeable our membranes are to substances. All right, then we have our plasma proteins. They also are very important for osmosis and osmotic balances and pH buffering. We have 3 specific proteins, and they each, if you notice here, there's 3 capital letters. Each of those capital letters goes with each of these types of plasma proteins. All of them are made by our liver, very important. And albumin is what's responsible for osmotic balance and pH buffering. So you can kind of like draw a little bracket, know that albumin goes with that. The clotting of blood, partly, because platelets have a role in this as well, is responsible from fibrinogen. That's an important plasma protein that helps out with the clotting of blood. And then defense, our antibodies and transportation of our fats and lipids are gamma globulins. That one's fun to say, gamma globulins. Another important protein that's our defense system, our antibodies, so that we can recognize invaders if you get sick again. And then things that get transported by the blood in the plasma, very, 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 very important things. This is literally why we have blood in a circulatory system, is to transport nutrients. We need food for our body, for our cells. Blood is how we get it around. Because we already have a transport system in place, other things hitch a ride as well. Waste, the bad stuff, circulates through our body, eventually hopefully ending up in your kidneys to filter out. The respiratory gases, oxygen and CO2, the 2's on there should be little subscripts, little ones. Those are traveling to and from the lungs where they're picking up and dropping off the gases. And then lastly, hormones. So our endocrine glands all secrete and dump their hormones into our bloodstream, and they get traveled around our body and have effects on different cells. So plasma is not just water. It's got lots of important things with important functions. If something goes wrong in any of these areas, we are going to have a bad day. All right, our formed elements, which are the most dense, this is why they drop down to the very bottom when they get spun or centrifuged, because they are stuff. They're not like things dissolved in water like the plasma is. Instead, these are cells, living cells that have a density to them. The majority, a huge majority of that is the erythrocytes. I'm going to use, and you should learn the name erythrocyte for this test, but those are white blood cells. Or sorry, not white blood cells, red blood cells. They're red blood cells, hence they're red on the screen. They live 120 days, and they have no nuclei. Our red blood cells are made in our bone marrow, and then it gets, once it's ready, and we'll talk about the blood forming process this chapter, but when they are ready, they get sent out to the bloodstream. They only live 120 days, and then they die, and our bone marrow has to regenerate more. So they never do mitosis. They also have no organelles at all. They're really unique that way. They end up ejecting all their organelles before they enter into the bloodstream so that they can do their job, which is to transport oxygen and then also carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide dissolves straight into the plasma as bicarbonate, but it also attaches to erythrocytes as well when they go back to the lungs. So there's 2 ways carbon dioxide is carried in their blood. But their main job, carry oxygen, very important. And so they have no nuclei, no organelles, so they can carry as much as possible. They are your red blood cells or erythrocytes. Now, red blood cells, make up, again, 45%. And you're saying like, okay, that's pretty much all of the formed elements. That's because these numbers are so minuscule in comparison to this 4 to 6 million. 4,000 to 11,000. Very, very tiny number in comparison to 6 million. Same as 500,000 is very small compared to these. So it's 45%. Take all of this, all of the red blood cells together, there's a word they use for that called the hematocrit, and I'll talk more about that on the next slide. All right, so then we have our leukocytes. Leukocytes are white blood cells. But we're going to use the word leukocyte in this chapter. Leuko, that prefix means white. Cyte means cell, white cell. Erythro means red cell. And so that's going back to the Latin roots there. Their main focus is to defend the body from invaders. They are fight off harmful cells. And there's different types, and you're going to learn the differences between them. We have basophils, eosinophils, lymphocytes, neutrophils, and monocytes. Those are our 5 types of leukocytes. And then later in this unit, you will learn the differences between them, their numbers, what they do, what they look like. All right. And then the last group down here, I couldn't really fit this word right here, but it belongs in that box, is these are the thrombocytes. So thrombocytes, they have no nuclei, much like the erythrocytes do. The leukocytes do. You can even see their nuclei in all of these little pictures. But they have no nuclei. These are basically fragments of cells, and their job is to start blood clotting. We talked about fibrinogen right here. It is involved in clotting of blood, but thrombocytes initiate it. They're essentially the thing that plugs the floodgates when you get an injury and essentially you have blood pouring out of your body. They're the first thing that clot or slow down your body. So we oftentimes call these guys platelets. So I have the common names over here, but these are the names we are going to be using in class. Thrombocytes are platelets, leukocytes, white blood cells, erythrocytes, red blood cells. All right. So the white blood cells and platelets are what make up the Buffy coat, that 1%, less than 1%. So they don't make very much of it up together, but all of these are formed elements because they're cells. So erythrocytes, leukocytes, thrombocytes, all cells, all into the word cyte means cell. They're all formed elements, but specifically white blood cells and platelets, or leukocytes and thrombocytes, make up our Buffy coat. Just to clarify there. All right. A little bit more on the hematocrit. If you want to emphasize, or I highlighted it here, and then down below here, I'm going to give you some details. You can just write this down underneath your chart. But save, you kind of see, let's see, like I highlighted this little thing in yellow, and then down here, this little box. But we're going to add a few more notes as well underneath. So the hematocrit is sticky, meaning our red blood cells. They're sticky. Right? They, like if you've ever felt blood before, okay, it's sticky. That's the best word I can use. If you were to taste it, or you've ever been bleeding in your mouth, it has a metallic taste. That's due to the iron in your blood. It is a weak base. It's alkaline, meaning it's above a 7, right? And this actually ends up giving the pH of blood its pH, which is also slightly alkaline, very close to 7, but slightly. It's more dense than water. This is why when we centrifuged it, okay, the red blood cells ended up dropping to the bottom here, and the plasma is at the top because plasma is mostly water. So it's more dense than water. It's why it sits at the very bottom. And then it's also opaque. If we actually had a sample of blood here, it would be yellow, but the plasma, you could kind of see through it, but the blood is, you can't see through it. That's what opaque means. It's not transparent. But if you donated blood and you looked at your bag when you were done, it was this bright, dark color. You couldn't see through the bag of blood because it is opaque. All right. So now I want you to add these brief notes right underneath that chart, still on the front. All right. Let's talk about the functions of blood. Why do we even have blood? What is it for? Transport, first and most important. It transports your respiratory gases, your oxygen and carbon dioxide. Again, those two should be subscripts. Nutrients, it circulates glucose, amino acids, and vitamins throughout your body. It also circulates hormones. This should all sound familiar because it was from the box above. And metabolic waste. So pretty much everything that was in that box right above is everything that blood transports. Okay? Pretty much the same information here. First, very, very important function of blood. It's your transport system. It's like a highway system through your body. It also regulates a number of things that are important for your body. So it's going to regulate your body temperature. And the integumentary system, we just talked about how it takes heat with us, and that is why I get a bright red face when I work out, and so I get very, very red in the face because heat and blood is traveling to my skin to try to cool me down. It also manages your pH of your blood, so the acid-base balance. So like I said, blood has a slightly alkaline pH. It needs to be in this very narrow range of 7.35 to 7.45. And if you remember from our chemistry unit, we did a buffer where I gave you some blood plasma. That was fake blood plasma, but I gave you blood plasma and we added an acid to it, and you should have seen that it did not change pH as easily as water did. That's because of buffers. Okay? And in particular, the albumin, the plasma protein that we mentioned before, it also regulates our water balance in our body too. So if you're a little dehydrated, your plasma will retain more water, or it will also excrete more water by bringing it to your kidneys if we need to release more water because we're well hydrated. And then the third function is protection. So it protects us from blood loss. Okay. Our body wants to maintain homeostasis and keep the blood in me that needs to stay in me. So it will enact an emergency response if I get a cut or an injury and clot. Yay for blood for doing that. It also is defensive. Your leukocytes, your white blood cells, fight off infection. If you end up with the Rona, you would see that your leukocytes are fighting off that virus, especially because there's no vaccine available yet. So your white blood cells contribute to that. And that is all as far as notes, but I did want to show you just a picture of blood. This is showing you with a scanning electron microscope, so the 3D image. This is more so what we'll see on the microscopes as far as what we see with blood. These are your erythrocytes, the little pink circled discs, and then anything that's got kind of a purpley speckles to it, those are your leukocytes or white blood cells. And then these tiny little fragments you see here in the background, those are platelets. So hopefully we'll be looking at some blood samples and you'll be able to see some of those on our microscope. But this is it in 3D image. Okay? Our leukocytes are our white blood cells. They've colored them to make them look white. The reason these look purple is because of staining. And then these small little chunks, okay, those are platelets that are considered cell fragments. All right, thank you for listening and taking your notes. Don't forget to do your assignment for Unit 10, Assignment 01 on types of blood cells. Thank you.